Picture a Harlem sidewalk at noon. June heat shimmers off the pavement when laughter cuts through the street laughter that doesn't belong. It isn't joy. It lands hard, like an open hand across the face. You're standing there with a cup of coffee, going cold, a folded newspaper tucked under your arm, watching a man known for patience being mocked in public by men who mistake protection for power. And in that instant, you understand you're witnessing the beginning of something that cannot be stopped. Because humiliation, once delivered in front of witnesses, does not stay contained. History doesn't ask for permission after that. It simply moves. It's 1948. Harlem is crowded, loud, alive and watchful. People notice shoes. They notice posture. They notice who holds a stare and who looks away. When the laughter dies, there is no applause. No one steps in. A woman behind a lunch counter freezes with a cup half filled. A delivery driver drops his eyes. Somewhere behind the window, a radio keeps playing, pretending nothing has shifted, but everything has. Bumpy Johnson doesn't react the way men expect. No shouting, no sudden violence. He straightens his coat. He takes a breath that lasts just a fraction longer than it should. And inside that pause, something takes shape, not fury, but design. A plan that won't erupt outward, but fold inward, tightening slowly around 9 men who don't yet realize they've already been counted. This is not a legend about rage. It's a story about inevitability. This is a story about restraint turning into momentum, about how public disrespect triggers private consequences, about how entire neighborhoods become accomplices simply by choosing not to look twice. If stories like this matter to you, remember to like and subscribe. It helps keep forgotten chapters of history alive. And before we go any further, tell me in the comments, what time is it? Where are you watching from? And what city are you in? Because once this clock starts, it doesn't stop. You don't interrupt it. You only watch it run. The mistake wasn't the laughter. That part was human. The mistake was where it happened and who saw it. 3 blocks south of 135th Street. Outside a storefront that sold hats no one bought and newspapers everyone read. Anastasia's men let the moment linger. They leaned into it. One flicked cigarette ash onto the sidewalk like punctuation. Another repeated the joke louder, making sure the people across the street heard. Power to them. It only mattered if it echoed. What they didn't understand was that Harlem measured power differently. This wasn't a private assault between rivals. It happened at lunchtime when porters poured out of the subway yards and women stepped out for groceries. It happened under open sky, where memory sticks. Public humiliation here didn't fade. It circulated. Bumpy Johnson stood there long enough for everyone to notice what he did not do. He didn't answer back. He didn't smile. He didn't reach for the pistol under his jacket. Instead, he glanced once to his left at a shoeshine boy who froze mid-brush. Then he looked past the men not at them as if they were already part of something finished. That look mattered more than words. Anastasia's enforcers mistook silence for permission. By the time they walked away laughing, the damage had already spread. In Harlem, disrespect was a signal flare. It told shopkeepers who might soon be asked questions. It told drivers which passengers might need rides at strange hours. It told bartenders which men would not be welcome for much longer. By late afternoon, story hadn't grown, it had shifted. It traveled without names. They did it in public. Right there by the hat shop. He didn't say a word. Each retelling shaved away detail and sharpened intent. That night, 9 men slept without knowing they'd been placed on a list that never existed on paper. The twist, the one Anastasia's people never anticipated, was that no order was given, no meeting called, no threat delivered. The retaliation began with absence. Phone calls went unanswered. Deliveries arrived late. A backroom card game suddenly had no chairs left. By midnight, one enforcer was turned away from a bar he'd controlled for years. By dawn, Another found his usual car missing from its spot. The keys returned neatly to the counter inside. Small inconveniences, each survivable alone. Together, a pattern. This wasn't violence. This was calibration. Bumpy Johnson understood something Anastasia's men did not. Humiliation creates witnesses, and witnesses create alignment. People don't need to be told what side they're on once they've decided who embarrassed whom. At 8:15 the next morning, a coffee cup rattled on a saucer in a Lenox Avenue diner when a delivery didn't arrive. At 9:40, a folded newspaper stayed folded longer than usual as a man pretended to read while listening. By noon, one of the 9 realized something was wrong, not because he'd been threatened, but because no one acknowledged him anymore. The city had begun to refuse them, and that was the second mistake. They believed power was something you carried on your hip. In Harlem, power was something the street either returned to you or quietly took away. By the end of that day, 9 men were still alive, still armed, still free and completely exposed. The clock didn't start with a threat. It started with routine. On Friday, June 18th, 1948, Bumpy Johnson woke at the same hour he always did. He drank his coffee black. He unfolded his newspaper once, then folded it back the same way, untouched. Anyone watching closely would have missed the moment. The deadline was set because it didn't announce itself. It embedded. The rule was simple and brutal. 72 hours. Not spoken, not written, just understood. By noon, Harlem's machinery was already adjusting. A numbers runner skipped one corner and chose another. A truck driver rerouted a delivery he'd driven the same way for 11 years. A doorman delayed opening a side entrance by exactly 2 minutes long enough to make a meeting fail. No one had been instructed. They were responding to a change in pressure. Harlem could feel when force was being applied. Here's the part Anastasia's people never saw coming. The deadline wasn't about killing anyone. It was about visibility. Bumpy Johnson understood timing. Violence too early scatters men. Violence too late looks like revenge. But pressure applied on schedule does something else. It hurts. It pushes men out of the shadows and into daylight, where patterns can be read. By the end of day 1, 4 of the 9 enforcers had broken routine. That alone was a warning sign. In organized crime, survival depends on predictability. When nearly half your people deviate inside 24 hours, something structural has already failed. At 3:20 p.m., one entered a barbershop he'd never used before. He didn't need a haircut. He needed to be seen somewhere new. At 5:05, another took the subway instead of driving. Unthinkable for a man who once bragged he never went underground. At 6:40, a third lingered too close to a storefront window, checking his reflection twice. Each adjustment made them louder. That night, Harlem didn't sleep differently. It listened differently. Day 2 narrowed the funnel. Bumpy Johnson didn't move openly. He stayed in low-ceiling rooms with poor light. He asked questions that sounded like small talk. Who'd been late? Who didn't show? Who asked for directions? Each answer added weight. By morning, the list of 9 had collapsed into clusters, pairs, and trios linked by habits, dependencies, weak spots. A confiscated notebook changed hands quietly that afternoon. It wasn't evidence. It was logistics, times, places, gaps. One line was circled twice in pencil, then erased until only the indentation remained. By sunset, Harlem had done something extraordinary. Without naming it, it had agreed not to warn anyone. That agreement always carries a cost. A waitress recognized a man walking toward danger and said nothing. A shop owner pretended not to hear a name spoken too loudly. These weren't villains or heroes, just people choosing which future they could live with. Here's the statistic that matters most. Within 48 hours, 7 of the 9 enforcers had been observed twice in public. Without realizing it, that level of exposure is fatal. Not because someone is waiting with a gun, but because someone is waiting with patience. The final twist of the countdown was psychological. By the morning of day 3, the men felt hunted but couldn't identify the hunter. No warnings, no messages, just friction, missed connections, locked doors, favors that evaporated. At 10 a.m., one of them made the mistake Bumpy was counting on. He asked for help, and in doing so, stepped into the light exactly where the clock said he would. The 72 hours hadn't expired. They didn't need to. Late morning, June 21st, 1948, outside a produce market on Lenox Avenue. One of Anastasia's enforcers was pulled into what looked like a harmless conversation. Some men, low voices, a nod, the kind of exchange that happened 100 times a day. What made it different was the stillness around them. No one lingered. No one leaned in. A crate of oranges rolled just enough to tap the curb and stop. This wasn't an ambush, it was a removal by noon. The second man was isolated in a place he believed neutral, a pool hall where he'd once been welcomed. The tables were open. The chalk was there. The felt was clean, but the owner didn't meet his eyes. The back door stayed locked. When the light shut off early, the message didn't need words. Shut off early, the message didn't need words. Here's the defining truth of this phase. The 9 weren't taken down by force alone. They were taken down by sequence. Bumpy Johnson understood that spectacle without chaos creates authority. Each move was public enough to be undeniable, quiet enough to avoid panic. By mid-afternoon, 3 more enforcers were cornered, not by guns, but by logistics collapsing beneath them. A car wouldn't start. A meeting location shifted. A trusted face turned away. Numbers matter because they reveal intent. Of the 9 men targeted that day, 6 were neutralized within a 4-hour window wall within a 10-block radius. No sirens, no crowds scattering. Just the slow realization, block by block, that something disciplined was unfolding in plain sight. A folded newspaper appeared again, this time on a stoop where a man sat longer than necessary, pretending to read while watching a corner. A woman adjusted her purse strap twice and crossed the street without looking back. These weren't orders, they were permissions. By early evening, the 7th and 8th enforcers made opposite mistakes. One ran, one hid. Both choices narrowed their options. Running made one visible. Hiding made the other predictable. Each was dealt with where people could see, but not interfere. The 9th was different. He survived, and that survival was intentional. As night settled over Harlem, the streets resumed their rhythm. Music drifted from open windows. A coffee cup steamed on a counter long after closing time. Beneath it all, an understanding took hold. The retaliation wasn't finished. It had paused, because this was never just about 9 men. It was about who sent them, and whether the man at the top was paying attention. Yet, downtown, news reached ears it wasn't meant to reach so quickly. Names were compared, times aligned. One question hung in the air, unanswered and unsettling. If this was done publicly, calmly, and without warning, what comes next? The most dangerous moment wasn't the violence, it was the pause that followed. By June 22nd, 1948, Harlem had absorbed what happened and decided how it would remember it. Not as chaos, not as bloodshed, as correction. After that, the 9 men were no longer spoken of by name. They became a measure of time. Before this, after this, that's how shopkeepers mark history. There was no celebration, no victory to toast. Harlem did something far more telling. It closed ranks. A bartender wiped the same glass 3 times without serving anyone new. A porter held a door a second too long, then let it close at exactly the wrong moment. A waitress misheard a request she understood perfectly. None of these were acts of bravery. They were acts of alignment, each small enough to deny, together decisive. Here's a statistic, rarely written down, but always felt. In the 48 hours following the public removals, street-level cooperation with outside crews in Harlem dropped to nearly zero. No tips, no directions, no casual warnings. Silence became policy. Most stories turned loud here. This one turned inward. Albert Anastasia was not a man accustomed to subtlety. He believed in speed, finality, and examples. But Harlem hadn't made an example. It had made a statement. Statements require interpretation. Bumpy Johnson didn't move against Anastasia directly. That would have been predictable. Instead, he allowed the vacuum to speak. The surviving enforcer of the ninth was seen deliberately in places he shouldn't have been. Alive, untouched, carrying knowledge no one asked him to share. That was the pressure point. Now Anastasia had to decide whether this was a warning or an invitation. A confiscated notebook surfaced briefly in a back room, then vanished again. Its contents were never discussed aloud. Times, routes, names linking Harlem to unions and supply lines farther south. Not a threat of violence and map of inconvenience. By evening, word reached downtown. Harlem wasn't angry. It was organized. So here's the question worth sitting with. When a community stops cooperating without saying a word, who is really holding the power? The next twist was quiet and decisive. Anastasia's people didn't retaliate that night, or the next. That hesitation wasn't mercy. It was calculation, and for the first time in years, the high executioner was reacting instead of dictating in his world. That was already a loss. The streets didn't celebrate the shift. They absorbed it. Harlem went back to work, back to music, back to routine. But beneath it all, a new rule was forming. Public disrespect carried compound interest by morning. The conflict had moved beyond men. It was now about systems, and systems, once exposed, don't bleed, they unravel. The meeting that was supposed to resolve everything never happened. That was the point. On June 24, 1948, a midtown room was prepared for confrontation. Chairs aligned, ashtrays emptied, coffee left warming too long, burning at the edges. The expectation was simple. Force would be displayed. A message delivered downward, but the chairs stayed empty longer than planned. One man arrived late. Another didn't arrive at all. That absence traveled faster than violence ever could. Schedules slipped. A union contact asked for clarification he'd never needed before. A shipment sat untouched for 6 hours because the right signature never appeared. No single act could be blamed. Together, they formed a pattern. The retaliation had climbed high enough that touching it would expose the entire chain. Harlem hadn't threatened the high executioner it had demonstrated. ACCSSA folded newspaper appeared again this time on a desk far from Lenox Avenue, held down by an anchor-shaped paperweight. Decorative, heavy, unnecessary. Everyone in the room understood the symbolism. Within a week, disruptions traced back to Harlem affected 3 separate supply routes tied to the same leadership. No guns, no bodies, just friction, multiplying. Fear changed shape. Violence could be answered with violence, but coordinated restraint left no target to strike without escalation, and escalation now carried risk. A look passed between 2 men at the table. Not agreement, recognition. Bumpy Johnson never asked for a seat in that room. He didn't need one. His presence was already implied by everything that wasn't happening. That was the touch knot, a hand laid on a shoulder. But a system brushed just hard enough to feel how exposed it was by nightfall. A decision was made that would never be written down. No retaliation, no correction. Harlem would be left alone for now, not as a concession, but as an acknowledgement. That acknowledgement carried a cost, because once power realizes it can be disrupted without being attacked, it never forgets the vulnerability. The coffee was finally poured out, replaced. The burned smell lingered anyway. A window opened. City noise rushed back in, pretending nothing had shifted, but everything had. The high executioner had been touched not publicly, not violently, but precisely where it mattered. If this could happen without chaos, what could restraint do next? The meeting ended without handshakes, without promises, just silence. And in that silence, a rule took shape. Never spoken, always obeyed. By the end of June 1948, Harlem looked unchanged to anyone passing through. Same music, same sidewalks, same rhythm. A man could stand on a corner and swear nothing was different. People who lived there knew better. They moved differently, spoke differently. They understood what had been demonstrated and what it had cost. This was the final truth. The outcome wasn't domination. It was containment. Bumpy Johnson didn't expand territory. He didn't press advantage. He let the moment settle. That restraint hardened the lesson. Power exercised publicly, then withdrawn, becomes memory. Memory outlasts fear. In the year that followed, open incursions by outside crews into Harlem dropped sharply, nearly disappearing. Business continued. Meetings happened. But traffic flowed around Harlem, not through it. An adjustment, quiet, deliberate. The ninth enforcer was seen once more that summer, sitting alone, not drinking, not speaking. A folded newspaper on the table, unread. He wasn't a threat anymore. He was evidence. Weeks later, a woman who had witnessed the original humiliation passed Bumpy Johnson on the street. Their eyes met. No smile, no nod. Neither looked away. That exchange carried more weight than applause ever could. It said, "We saw, we remember." That's how unwritten rules are, sealed not by celebration, but by mutual acknowledgement. Downtown, the incident was never referenced directly. It didn't need to be. In that world, what goes unsaid carries authority. The lesson filtered downward through tone, timing, absence. Harlem was not to be tested publicly. Late one evening, a coffee cup was cleared from a table it had occupied for hours. The ring it left behind was wiped away carefully, as if no one wanted a trace. That was the legacy. Not 9 men removed, not a boss confronted, but a boundary, drawn so cleanly it no longer needed defense. History would never record it as a treaty. No document would name it. Yet generations would inherit the behavior shaped by those days in June, moving carefully around a neighborhood that had proven something dangerous. That humiliation, when answered with restraint, doesn't fade. It reorganizes the future. And in Harlem, the future learned to remember.